So welcome, everybody. My name is Brandy, and I am with Da Vinci Laboratories. We are beyond excited to bring you this presentation today with Dr. Taz. Da Vinci has been in the nutraceutical business for over 45 years, and we have specialized in private label, custom formula. We continue to be based in Vermont. And then a little bit about Dr. Taz. Dr. Taz is a board-certified integrative medicine physician and wellness expert who gained national recognition as best-selling author of What Doctors Eat, 21-Day Belly Fix, and Superwoman RX. Her integration of Eastern medical wisdom with modern science, along with her unique power-type discovery, has led her to featured segments on the Today Show, Dr. Oz, Live with Kelly and Ryan, and eventually the premiere of her own PBS special, Superwoman RX with Dr. Taz. She is the host of Radio MD's The Dr. Taz Show, Superwoman Wellness Podcast. Dubbed a superwoman in her own right, Dr. Taz is committed to empowering women to radically transform their lives through personalized lifestyle, diet, exercise, self-care, and relationship strategies to help them rediscover their own superpowers. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Dr. Taz.
Hi, everyone. So good to see everybody joining me on this afternoon, wherever you are across the country or even the world. I'm thrilled to be here, and I don't want to talk too much about myself, but this is a personal passion for me for a number of different reasons. I, because of my own health journey and sort of what transpired with me over 20 years ago, got into the field of integrative and functional medicine, trying to heal myself and understand my issues, and through it got introduced to the world of Chinese medicine. And Chinese medicine, one of the key things that they stress is the very fundamental connection between the mother and the child, and how you can't treat a mom, treat a child without fully really treating them as a unit, and that how that unit was then so critical for the entire family and the health well-being of the entire family. And they would expand it even a few more rings forward, that when that family was healthy, the local community or neighborhood was healthy. When that neighborhood was healthy, a city was healthy, a country was healthy, and it would just sort of build and ripple from that point on. And so it's with that in mind that I started my practice, which originally was called Atlanta Center for Holistic and Integrative Medicine. And my early logos, if you ever go digging up, you'll see it's the image of a mom with a child underneath, because my vision was I wanted to create a place for both mothers and children to come to, because that is the fundamental heartbeat of a family. And it's just so ironic that I'm doing this webinar today with all of you, because I've also just come back, which is why I was just a few minutes late jumping on, but I've also just come back from one of our birth centers here in town, which is really, again, trying to integrate that mom-baby idea and really bring it all in a holistic way rather than chopping everything up separately like conventional medicine typically does. I am a physician, and we do a lot of conventional medicine in practice, but the motto, the mission is to merge and use a lot of east-west medicine so we get a whole picture of the person. And that's the perspective and the viewpoint that I'm going to bring to you today. So I am an MD. I'm a licensed acupuncturist and very passionate about Chinese medicine. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. I'm board-certified in integrative medicine as well. And I'm a nutritionist. And also have certifications in Ayurveda. So I've got this, I only tell you all that to tell you I've got this mishmash of credentials and knowledge that I use in anything I touch and do. And I think it's so important to bring that, as you'll see in just a few minutes, into this topic that we're talking about today, which is really grasping and trying to understand the mom-child connection. All right, let's see. Just a minute. 2 seconds. Okay, so you know about Da Vinci already. We've already talked about me. We don't need to talk too much more about me. This is what we are all here today to really talk about and get into, is what's happening with mothers and children and why it's so important to understand that. I want to orient us just for a second on how we're going to approach this topic and kind of where we are today when we talk about the mom-child connection. Anytime I use that language today, what most people think I'm referring to is essentially bonding, or that concept of bonding. And raise your hand if you know what that is. You've probably heard it from your doctors, from your own mom, from the community. The bonding is where most of the energy and discourse lies when it comes to talking about the mom-child connection. But here's the deal. Bonding is about the relationship, and the emotional attachment between a mother and a child a lot of times is limited to just that sort of perinatal pregnancy period of time and maybe the time right after. But there's very little about the science of the mom-child connection. We don't talk about that very much, or how we're proving that so many different aspects of our health as mothers gets directly transposed onto our children, and vice versa. Their health has been directly imposed on us. And so that's the part we're missing when we look at it just from the conventional Western model. But we want to take a step back. I want to show you the research purely in science today, because the beauty of all of this is to be able to show you this research and then to be able to also show you how traditional Chinese medicine predicted all of this stuff years and years ago. So there are three key places where research is focused when they're talking about the mom-child connection. They talk a lot about conception, so the ideal environment for conception, and we're going to go through some of that science in just a minute. They talk about pregnancy and what is an ideal pregnancy and how do you maximize pregnancy, and the pregnancy experience for both the mother and the child, and there's a lot of good work done there. And then there's a lot of talk, and maybe you guys have experienced this personally, on the postpartum period, which is the time frame right after delivery, up until about 6 weeks and even up to 12 weeks post-delivery, where what's happening with the mother during that very critical phase, or hormone shifting, all this other stuff is happening, is bonding taking place, and that's where the majority of work on the mom-child connection is to this point. Well, let's break it down a little bit, because I do want you guys to understand sort of what's happened, and I'm sorry, I'm having trouble navigating here. Let's see. We'll get it. Bear with me. Technology is not my forte. Right. All right, so let's break it down to conception to begin with. All right, so many people think about having a baby and maybe plan for it. I don't know if any of you consciously plan to have a baby. I know in my own personal journey, I thought about it. I didn't really think to get healthy. I was thinking more in those years about getting financially ready, as you might too, about getting sort of my work situation lined up and understanding what my home environment might be like. And there was a lot of energy, of course, on the latest gadgets, the tools, all the different monitors, all these different things we wanted to get or buy to be ready for the baby. Thinking back, even if I was not thinking about preconception health, I'm not sure how much any of you were. Here's what happens in the conventional setting. In the conventional setting, there is a lot of discussion about screening for, different sexually transmitted diseases, making sure those aren't there. So that's everything from HPV, HIV, looking for chlamydia, gonorrhea. You've had some of these tests before, but a lot of the focus is there. And have you been exposed to an STD? How's your uterus? Is that healthy? Do you have things like fibroids or ovarian cysts or endometriosis, things that will block conception and make it difficult for you to conceive? But there's not a ton of emphasis on anything much more than that, and that's where there's a major gap, especially in the context of pediatrics today and many of the disorders that we're seeing. Now, here's an example of some of the research that we've got in this current time. So here's an article from 2011, for example. This is in Science News, and this talks about the concept of maternal weight. And I hope I'm not boring you. Many of you know that the impact of maternal weight on the health of your babies. But again, this particular study talked about women that were on either end of the spectrum of weight, whether they were very underweight or whether they were very overweight. Either end of that, they had a higher risk for preterm delivery, low birth weight babies, babies that had a higher risk for autism, and babies that ultimately had more issues with feeding, thriving, any of those type of things that you've heard and read about. So that study was published in 2011 in one of the Scandinavian journals, and it is like many other studies, quite honestly, out there that link maternal birth weight, to the outcomes for pregnancy and later on delivery. So why is that a conception discussion? The reason that's a conventionally accepted conception discussion is because doctors today are counseling patients in the room, and hopefully you've experienced this, that before you're thinking about having a baby, it is really important to manage your weight. So where is your weight? Where's your BMI? For any of you taking notes, this is, again, conventional, not Chinese medicine, but we want your BMI to be at least between 19 and 24. We feel like when you go under 19 or you go over 24, that's where we see so many issues with, first of all, getting pregnant, and then secondly, having a lot more complications throughout your pregnancy and even into that postpartum period. So the science is uniform there. Everyone is on the same page there when it comes to maternal weight and how that impacts the baby and how that's so important to deal with in the conception period. Now here's where the science gets a little bit, not murky, I don't want to say, but in the current landscape, there's just a lot of interesting, fascinating stuff going on. And it's fascinating to me. I'm sure you're going to find it's fascinating to you. Many of you that are thinking about getting pregnant or are pregnant may also know at the same time, and this is not to scare anyone, but also know that there's this huge increase in autism, right, over the years. There's been this incredible increase in the rates of autism. And as a pediatrician, I would say it's not just autism, it's the increase in the rates of sensory issues in children, neurodevelopmental issues, conditions like PANS and PANDAS, where children, suddenly develop these weird immune reactions to viruses and different bacteria. So we have this new wave in the world of pediatrics that people are really kind of scratching their head and having trouble understanding, like, where is this coming from? What's happening? Well, this is where science is trying really hard to catch up. And when we talk about Chinese medicine in a second, you'll see how far behind we are compared to what our forefathers taught us when it comes to the mom-child connection. There are over 14 to 15 studies today, and I'm looking at my notes just because I had to write all these studies down, that link your air quality and your environmental exposure, but mainly focused on air quality, to autism. So again, the importance of our environment plays a critical role. There's an additional chunk of studies that are linking the medications you're on as a mom before you even get pregnant. So again, that preconception and conception period, linking that to autism. There's also a huge link, again, this is science today, not going into any other alternative world, but this is science today, linking your nutrition to your chance of having a child with ADD, ADHD, autism, or sensory disorders. In fact, there was a Norwegian study published a couple of years ago that found that mothers who took supplements, especially between 4 weeks before and 8 weeks after conception, this is not even pregnancy, so this is again, hey, I'm thinking about this, but they took it 4 weeks before and 8 weeks after conception, were 40% less likely, 40%, that's huge, guys, less likely to have children diagnosed with autism than those who didn't take that supplement at all. And the supplement they're referring to is folate and B vitamins, and that will come up time and time again, just as it does in practice, because we're really finding that there are certain genes that are turned on immediately as soon as 3 days after conception when you have a deficiency in B vitamins and in folate. So again, the science here is catching up a little bit with, okay, in the conception period, we don't need to just be talking about sexual health and perinatal screenings. We also need to be talking about environmental exposure. We need to be talking about the medications that you might be taking before you're ready to get pregnant. We need to be talking about your nutrition, like where are you with B vitamins and folate. There's some ongoing studies right now on vitamin D and some of the other antioxidants as well, along with the role of fats like the omega-3 fats and the essential fats to help understand where those fit into the equation of conception and then the influence that that has on the child. There's another area that we're connecting very much to conception and what's happening with babies and their mothers, moms that have inflammatory conditions. Okay, so for example, if you're a mom, and an inflammatory condition is really vague, by the way, so that word of inflammation we use a ton in practice, but for the purposes of science and research, an inflammatory condition is considered somebody with diabetes, with hypertension, with any type of autoimmune disease. Those are all different inflammatory conditions. Well, what some of the different studies are finding is that mothers with inflammatory conditions have a higher risk of having children with autism. And again, this is not about scaring you as a mom or scaring anybody out there who may have an issue. This is about, again, connecting the dots. And here's where the connection is. Moms who have an inflammatory condition any one of the autoimmune diseases that we know today, or anyone really that's having digestive issues, they then get pregnant without fixing that inflammation or without really dealing with that inflammation. Here's what happens next. When we conceive, the immune system of the fetus and the immune system of the mom talk to each other. It's actually really fascinating. We know that there's such an integral role that the two immune systems play with each other. But if you're dealing with a mom with a lot of inflammation and an autoimmune disease, or a mom with poor digestive health, what we found in some of the studies is that in response to that, there is a trigger, and you can actually measure this. It's fascinating. You can measure this in lab work. But something called IL-17, interleukin-17, which is a chemical that triggers inflammation, has been found to be linked to autism. So again, you know, when I see mothers who are thinking about starting a family, or maybe you got pregnant accidentally, you still need to have this mental checklist just based on the work that we've seen today, just in science today, with where is your environmental load in terms of toxicity, where's your weight, where are you with STDs, where are you with inflammation, which is a core preconception concept that is really important to get down and understand where you are, where's your immune system, where's your nutrition, because all of this can have an impact on your baby as early as 3 days post-conception. And that just, I don't know about you, that blows my mind when I see this stuff, because some of us, myself included, didn't know this. And imagine, you know, kind of, you know, I don't know, just imagine how much potential and opportunity there is to reverse what so many of our children face today if we have this information in our hand right from the get-go. Okay, so moving on from conception, let's move on to the current science, where we stand today on just pregnancy and the mom-child connection. And there's a lot of work here, right? Let's be fair. There's a ton of great work done here on how pregnancy and the whole phase of pregnancy, the 3 trimesters, the impact that has on bonding, back to that word, and on the parental relationship, the mom-child connection, and on health for both the mother and both the child. So let's just review some things that you may already know, but I want you to have these landmarks in your head, because these are pivotal points in your pregnancy, if you're pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, that you should have in your mind, because these are times where there's shifting, there's changing, there's nurturing of that relationship. So one pivotal moment is at 18 to 25 weeks. That's roughly the time that most mothers feel the baby move. And it's exciting. Finally, this thing doesn't seem abstract. It's happening. You feel something moving within you. You know it's real. You know it's going to happen. The next big landmark is right by the 7th month of pregnancy or so, where hopefully, if you're a mom, you're starting to feel attachment. You're feeling bonded to this life that you've created inside of you. And the science that's backing that up is equally fascinating. Here's what they're finding, is that when moms are pregnant, as they're approaching that 7th month or so, fetal cells, so cells from your unborn baby, are passing into your bloodstream, implanting into your tissues, and they essentially are becoming a part of you just as much as you're becoming a part of them. So that whole process of bonding and attachment is incredibly fascinating and is taking place for a period of time. Okay. Secondly, mom's health through pregnancy is going to determine the health of the baby. And again, we know this. I feel like this might be a little bit repetitive for anybody listening right now. We've already talked about weight. We've talked about inflammation risk. Managing a good blood pressure is yet another thing to really be conscious of, because we know the risk of preeclampsia in terms of preterm labor and the impact of the child. So that's another one. All of those factors play into the health of the baby through pregnancy itself. Now realize then at 32 weeks, here's another landmark that I hope you guys are writing down. At 32 weeks, someone is asking me about slides. So these are the slides, but I'm doing a lot of presentation in the notes, so maybe we can put the notes up later. At 32 weeks, many of the moms, or this is where most of the babies will start to recognize language, and they'll start to recognize vowel sounds. So that's a great time to start talking to your baby and interacting with your baby, because your baby will actually start to recognize your voice, and that's fascinating too, because again, that's one more level of bonding or attachment. And lastly, the timing of the baby's birth is going to be critical. So if the mom is highly stressed, if the mom is not hydrating well, is not resting well. I worked a lot of night shifts, for example, in both my pregnancies, actually. I was working in the emergency room. So I worked a lot of night shifts in those times, and I remember being incredibly stressed. And we're going to connect my stress to what happened with my kids in just a minute. But if you're not resting, if you're not hydrating, if you're putting your body in conditions where blood pressure may go up, hormones may shift drastically, then the timing of the baby's birth can be affected, and you're more likely to have an earlier term birth. So all of that's important. And again, not to connect everything back to autism, but everything from brain development, learning issues, focus issues, and just overall health and ability to thrive is connected to the time when we give birth. And again, going back to science and research and studies, there are studies that show having a baby 9 weeks earlier than term is a higher autism risk as well. And, you know, when my time, there was sort of a trend, so to speak, of women trying to schedule their deliveries, right? Trying to schedule their C-sections. And more we're understanding the importance of going to term, to not have that scheduled 36 to 38-week C-section, because there's so much that gets influenced, including the baby's gut bacteria, your gut bacteria, your ability to heal post-pregnancy, and so many other things. One more thing to talk about in sort of this pregnancy phase is the importance of our emotions and thoughts even during pregnancy. I'm going to get to it after pregnancy, but so much so during pregnancy. Because here is the challenge. Everything's being recorded. I did a TED Talk a couple years ago on the concept of mitochondrial DNA. And what we're starting to understand in science is that our thoughts, our emotions are all being recorded. They're being recorded in our DNA, and mostly recorded in mitochondrial DNA. Why is that important for you to know? Well, mitochondrial DNA lives in a cell. It's the powerhouse of the cell, but mitochondrial DNA passes generation to generation unchanged. It's not influenced by paternal DNA. So think about the ramifications of that, that if, for example, you had a mother or grandmother who had suffered and was very negative or very depressed or very down, they're learning in science today that that is being transposed generation after generation after generation unless we consciously try to change that. And that's something we've seen in my own family where, you know, we've seen sort of the line of women being suppressed, and I'm not suppressed, but I still see the hesitation and the sort of tentativeness is probably the best word in my daughter, even though she's been brought up in the best of circumstances and with so many different opportunities. So again, just a reminder, and that's a very Chinese medicine concept too, by the way, that the thoughts of the mother implant on the child, the thoughts of the child implant on the mother. You can't treat the two separately. They're a unit, it's synergy, and it influences the entire family. All right, we're going to move on to one more phase that is critical. Sorry about that. Let me get everything here. 2 seconds. So we're going to move on to the postpartum phase. And the challenge with the postpartum phase, again, I think is the strength of conventional medicine. We started to understand a little bit more, and at least there's more awareness, I should say, about what's happening with women here. And understanding that the change in hormones, the lack of emotional support, can create deep, deep depression and deep anxiety in women. I don't know if any of you have suffered from that. I think I might have gone through a mild version of that after my first child. But this is such a critical phase because this is where there's either failure or success when we talk about bonding or attachment. And what we're finding is that when there's a lack of bonding and a lack of attachment through this phase, which most people define as a 6 to 12 weeks post-delivery, then it directly impacts the child. And we're going to break that down in just a minute. Here's just some interesting statistics when I was looking the other night. But this is present, postpartum depression is present in about 10% of women that give birth. That's a pretty high number. That means, you know, on any given day, out of all the women you meet, there's a certain chance that 1 out of every 10 pregnant women are having an issue with depression. So that's a problem. Depression or anxiety, the most common links to that in that postpartum period. It can be caused by financial issues that, oh my goodness, suddenly you have this new life. How am I going to care for this particular person? We see that a lot, by the way, in the fathers. I think a lot of times we don't talk about the impact of pregnancy on fathers, So we see that particular concern a lot with fathers. Or there's a lack of emotional support. There's not a community or a village of women to support a woman in this very critical postpartum period, or there's a lack of spousal support. So what the science tells us today, that these are very real, very tangible reasons that women suffer from postpartum depression. Additional reasons would be changes in hormones, changes in nutrient status, changes in the gut completely almost, some people will call it a detox, others will call it a reset, but the gut will completely change post-pregnancy. So all of these changes, remember, can contribute to your emotional state and to whether you do or do not have anxiety or depression in that postpartum period. Again, Chinese medicine predicted all of this so beautifully, and they talked about concepts like postnatal depletion, or how, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute too, or how important it was for a woman to be nurtured in this postpartum period rather than be in a rush to get back to work or, you know, to get all her deadlines done. So this is a key concept, and this was a high-risk period in the Eastern systems of medicine for a woman losing herself, losing her vitality and her energy. In the conventional medical model, what we're understanding is the high risk of depression, and I think there's more awareness that's been brought to that over the years. But remember, here's the consequence of that. There's the consequences for you as a mom, but then there's the concern for your children. And here's the concern for the children. Babies who don't develop a secure attachment have trouble interacting with their mother. They not want to be with them. They may get upset. They can become withdrawn or passive. And they are often developmentally delayed. They don't develop skills as quickly. Their language is delayed. You'll see their eye contact be delayed as well. When we go to an older group, and again, this is where we need to think about bonding and attachment and the mom-child connection beyond the postpartum period, beyond pregnancy, beyond conception. So when we think about the toddler and preschool group, if there's not attachment and bonding, you know, then those preschoolers usually are less likely to interact with other people, and they have a lot of issues with discipline. They have a tendency to be more aggressive and destructive, and they have a lot of issues with school success as well. So this is an issue in the preschool group, and if we go even older and then into adolescence, the consequences of a lack of bonding and a lack of attachment are significant. Again, it's behavior, it's learning challenges, it's more ADD, ADHD, it's a lot of anxiety and depression. And then again, those are the children often that will go on and have issues with substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and so many other things because they just feel this void or this gap in their life. There's one additional study on, I don't know if you guys have seen this, on microchimeras, and this is again that concept talking about how critical, you know, this postpartum period is a time too where you shed the placenta, there's a general shedding for the mom, but she retains a lot of fetal cells, and those fetal cells integrate into maternal tissue. And they integrate to the extent that they're finding, again, in science, that those cells may transport to your sibling cells or the sibling cells or the next child's cells, and they get transported down. So I found all of that fascinating. I was joking with my kids and telling them, like, hey, did you know that your cells are in her and her cells are in him? And they thought the whole thing was weird and fascinating, but also I think they were kind of grossed out by all of it. So this is why I'm such a huge fan. So this is the science, but really when we want to make a difference and we want to treat we want to understand the mom-child connection, it's really an east-west approach that makes a difference, because here is what I'm finding overlooked. There's all this fascinating science and all this fascinating research, but no one's really pulling it together and putting the dots together, and again, just really educating women on, hey, you want to have a child, you're about to have a child, you've had a child, you've got to think about these 5 elements, these 5 things I've listed out here, because if we ignore any of these, then it directly impacts the health of our child. And when the health of our child's impacted, it impacts us. So, you know, that classic line, you know, you're only as happy as your happiest child. So those 5 key points, and I would write this down because I would like you to take sort of a self-assessment of yourself and see where you are with some of these things. How sort of deliberate are you with your nutrition? How much have you paid attention to toxicity and the toxic load that you might be getting? And we'll talk more about where some of these toxins come from. How much attention have you paid to gut health? How much attention have you paid to epigenetics? And then, of course, one of the most important critical pieces is where is your emotional and mental well-being? When any of these are ignored, then we have a recipe for breaking that mom-child connection, or for that connection to not be as vital and as profoundly powerful as it could be. And further, I want you to see, I purposely drew it as a pentagon here because I want you to see how it's all connected, because your emotional and mental well-being is related to your nutrition. Your nutrition influences how you deal with toxins. Your toxins influence your gut, but can also influence your nutrition. Your gut can influence which genes do and do not turn on. Many people think when we talk epigenetics, it's the end-all be-all. But remember, those genes are switched on and off all the time. And it's how you live within sort of these 5 kind of key areas that determine what those genes are going to do. And then all of that goes right back to impacting your emotional health. So we want to break this down just a little bit. And with this East-West approach to medicine, you know, when we bring in the model of Chinese medicine, they have a very different take and very different angle on it. And so when we finally put it all together, it's so amazing to take the research and the science component of what we already know and merge it with this East-West sort of philosophy. So in traditional Chinese medicine, birth and conception is all about shifting from yang energy, which is like rah, 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 go, 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 you're going to accomplish a million things, to shifting to a more yin state, which is a more nurturing or a more balanced state. Further, in traditional Chinese medicine, there's a lot more emphasis on the season of motherhood, not just on conceiving, not just on getting pregnant, not just on the postpartum period. It's considered a season. If that season lasts 18 to 20 years, that's the length of the season. So motherhood was almost like a highly spiritual role that people had to play in these Eastern systems of medicine. And the mother was held in very high regard. And the jobs of the mother and the duties of the mother were almost first compared to anything anybody else had to do. So motherhood was valued, and we've come a long way from where we feel and believe that motherhood is of incredibly high value. So in traditional Chinese medicine, food for the conceiving mother, the pregnant mother, the postpartum mother was all about building energy. It was all about really making sure that women had the sustenance and the support to support another child or another life. So they focused on a couple of things, and I would challenge you guys to maybe put this into practice. They focused on, especially if you're conceiving or pregnant or in that postpartum window, they focused on warm foods, not cold foods. You never drank ice water. You always did a lot of soups and broths. In fact, I have here, if I have time, we can go through all the different, fun soups that they would make to nurture the mom. But warmth was a very important concept. They believed in building blood, so they believed in high iron foods. They would have moms eat liver in any form they could because they believed the iron and the B vitamins there were critical. But that was a central TCM concept. They were also very big believers in digestive health. They didn't know about microbes and the microbiome like we talk about it today, but they knew that the gut was the foundation of health. So much so, the gut is connected to the spleen meridian, and meridians in Chinese medicine are channels of energy that run through the body, but the spleen meridian is responsible for digestion. It is the master digestive meridian in Chinese medicine. They would diagnose that, and you guys can do this on your own, but they would diagnose problems with the spleen meridian by looking at the tongue. And when someone stuck their tongue out, if that tongue was very coated or very yellow or very fiery looking, then they knew someone had spleen meridian deficiency. And that spleen meridian deficiency was a sign that whatever treatment plan they were working on with herbs and acupuncture and cupping and all these different modalities, that treatment plan needed to include a way to rebuild and reboot the gut. Their strategy, again, was to have simple foods, not foods that were heavy, not foods that were too sweet or too greasy. They felt like those were foods that were very hard on the digestive system, and that would not be helpful. They did a lot of fermented foods back in that time as well. And they did, again, a lot of broths, and today we know that broth has a lot of immunoglobulins in it to boost your immune system, and broth also has a lot of good gut bacteria and collagen and all these other things that help to boost your immune system. So they were sort of onto it when it came to the gut being the foundation of health, as we're finding out in research today, and also being sort of ground zero for the mom-child connection. Now, what did Chinese medicine say about epigenetics? Well, they couldn't define genetics necessarily. They weren't marking genes, but they were very convinced that if there was not the right diet and there were not the right sort of nutritional support on hand in the form of herbal therapies and herbal teas and soups, then there would be a problem. They called it a problem in the transfer of energy. between the mother and the child. And they define this as weakness in qi, and specifically kidney meridian deficiency. So the central Chinese medicine concept is that you gift your child, essentially, through the way you live your life and the way you conduct your health, you gift your child with a certain amount of qi. And most of that qi is in the form of the kidney meridian, and that kidney meridian, they say, holds the life force. And it's fascinating in practice because we'll look at kidney meridian energy all the time, and there's some people that come in with a ton of energy. They have a lot of great energy. Their kidney meridians look great, but many other people come in and it's worn down even at an early age, even in like at the age of 5 or 4 or 3. So a problem today in pediatrics is that the majority of our kids are weakening. We're seeing very weak kidney meridian energy across the board in children. And most of that is connected back to the fact that we as mothers are weakening because of the things we're facing today in our environment and with our lives, and what I call superwoman syndrome and the struggle to be all and do all the time. So while TCM didn't talk specifically about genes, they did talk about the importance of energy transfer and having the right herbs and the right supplements and the right sort of diet to make sure that happened appropriately. In TCM, there was a lot of importance placed on the liver. And the liver was considered a digestive organ, but also the laundromat, so to speak, for the entire body. So, for example, if the mom did not pay attention to the quality of her food, her air, her water, her home environment, then she was at risk of passing that on to her child. She would pass on weak liver energy. We call that liver meridian stasis or liver meridian deficiency. And that liver meridian issue would pass on to the child. The child would have a lot of emotional regulation problems. This is the fun, fascinating part of this, because here we are in the world of pediatrics seeing all this stuff with kids becoming more sensory, having more neurodevelopmental issues, having OCD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disease, all this other stuff. Well, we have a generation of kids being born and being brought into the world with very weak livers, while we have a time of very high toxicity. And when you merge those two together, the weakening of our livers and our overall constitution with the toxic environment, all of that emotional output in Chinese medicine is predicted to result in incredible anger and anxiety. And that's exactly what we're seeing in practice with so many kids unable to regulate their emotional sort of clock and having to be sent off to different programs and schools and things like that. Pictured here are some of the common toxins that any of us are getting exposed to at any moment in time. I think it's really important to take a critical look at your food sourcing, to take a critical look at your body care products, your makeup, what you're using. You know, look at your home environment. What water are you using? What's the air quality in the city that you live in? And get a real sense of what's happening there, because the more you can screen down and eliminate toxins, you won't be able to get rid of all of them. But the more you can narrow them down, you're essentially gifting your child with better liver energy. And if your child is already here, you're indirectly improving their liver energy as well, helping them detox what they're sort of getting exposed to in the environment. So toxicity is a huge concern today. And lastly, the TCM model recognized the importance of emotions, memory, and mitochondrial DNA, which I mentioned earlier. They, again, very much believe that the thoughts and the emotions of the mother got sort of transposed into her qi, into her life force, into her jing. They had all these different words for it, and then that in turn was literally transferred over to the child. So again, they didn't talk about DNA or mitochondrial DNA. They talked a lot more about the transfer of energy, the transfer of essence, and how that in turn impacted the child's health. So guarding your emotional health, understanding what your thought pattern is, you know, for a new mom, for a young mom, or even for an older mom, I think those are so important, and that's why that mother figure needs so much support, because it really determines the success of generations to come. So TCM placed so much value on all those different pieces of the puzzle, but they defined it in a different way. They talked about, and you've heard me use some of these terms, I just want to go over them briefly before we sort of do a treatment plan. They talked about qi, which is energy. Many people today, I think, are walking around very low qi. I, in my health journey, by my early Chinese medicine mentors and doctors, I remember my professor waving his hand at me and looking at kind of my bald head and saying, very bad qi, your qi is very bad. But that essentially defines your vitality. your energy, your spark. And when that drops down, that's also dropping down further as you have children, as you give birth, as you breastfeed, your chi continues to be depleted. So that's the concept of postnatal depletion, and also the concept of building chi, really important to build energy. Chinese medicine sees the mom-child connection a lot in terms of yin and yang states, that when there's an imbalance of yin and yang energy, it will disrupt the mom-child relationship. Now, we can all relate to this one. I'm still living this one. A yin state is one where the mother is nurtured, she herself is nurtured, and she is able to nurture her children. A yang state is that go-getter state. I'm going to do, I'm going to accomplish, I'm going to run. Now, one of the things that came out of the last book I wrote, Superwoman RX, is I had all these different power types. And each power type was associated with a Chinese medicine diagnosis, an Ayurvedic medicine diagnosis, and then had a personality trait that went with it. One of the things that was fascinating to find was that the majority of women today, the majority of women that took this test, were all in sort of a yang state. They all had liver meridian excess. They were just pounding it. They were going for it, which is amazing. We all want to accomplish things. But because of that, they were depleting their energy, and they were depleting and altering their hormone levels. And that, in turn, was creating all kinds of personal health issues for them. But then when we look at it from a mom-child perspective, that was also creating problems with attachment and bonding with their children, because there was so much anger and anxiety from the mom. The child was feeling it as well. So remember, it's always kind of a two-way street. So that was fascinating, and that came out of the Superwoman book, that the majority of you guys are in a yang state. You're not in a yin nurturing state. You're passing that energy on to the child. The child ends up being in a yang state, anxious, frustrated, depressed, and then we continue to have a lot of the different learning issues that we're seeing today. They talked a lot about deficiency. So the blood had to be vital. It had to be full of nutrients. You shouldn't be in a deficiency state. Deficiency states were when you were cold or weak, or your nails were brittle, or your hair is falling. Those were common deficiency states. And so they would try very hard to make sure a mother, someone about to conceive, pregnant or postpartum, and even through that first year of life, was not in a deficiency state. So they had so many different ways of trying to build deficiency, trying to prevent blood deficiency, and trying to improve the whole concept of deficiency, which in turn improved chi and energy. And lastly, I didn't put it on the slide, but I think it's important to remember that in addition to these three concepts, there's the meridian theory. And meridians, remember, people often don't understand how acupuncture works. So meridians are channels of energy that run through the entire body, and the acupuncture points are along each of those channels. And when a meridian gets blocked, and it blocks energy, it creates deficiency, it flips you into a yin or yang state, and then it affects your chi. So all of this ultimately is very much related together. Okay, how do we build your chi? How do we put you back together? How do we balance your yin and yang? So what I want to do now, I was just looking at time, what I want to do now is kind of build a treatment plan and maybe have you walk away with something from these different concepts so that you have some tangible things that you can follow. So we're going to go right into maybe some how-tos and what to do. So starting out with, how do we use nutrition to build your chi and support deficiency? So here are some go-to rules that I would like to make sure you all have, and we're pulling this from Chinese medicine, but we're also pulling it from conventional medicine and what we know works today for women. When we talk about building chi and supporting deficiency in you, the mom, we're talking about building your energy, your vitality, and your hormonal balance, which then directly impacts your child. So number one, warm foods. So really increase warm foods, start staying away from too many cold or raw foods. Those actually deplete you. They create a deficiency state. You can use some of my favorite spices that are warming spices like ginger, cinnamon, and cloves. Bring in some of those soups. There's so many great recipes for Chinese herbal soups and broths. They nourish the gut, and they help, again, provide key nutrients, protein, amino acids, collagen, and even B vitamin to help build chi and support deficiency. We want to make sure you really up your protein, and I think that's so challenging for so many women when they're not feeling good, but getting in that protein is critical. If you look at a lot of the Chinese recipes, a lot of it is meat. They eat so much meat, and so we're not saying we want to flip to that extent of eating a ton of meat, but we want to make sure women in general are getting at least 60 grams of protein a day, and then if they're in a nursing state, a pregnancy state, or a postpartum state, that number probably needs to be higher. It probably needs to be closer to 70 or 80 grams of protein per day. Get in those healthy fats. Add in the olive oil, the coconut oil, the ghee. The fats, they thought, built qi and helped support deficiency. And then organ meats, which is not my personal favorite, but it was a big piece of Chinese medicine in terms of replenishing blood, replenishing iron to help support the mother. So liver, kidney, those were common organ meats. Moving on from nutrition, thinking about maybe using different things to build your gut health. And I would actually throw in one more thing before we leave nutrition. Methylated B vitamins, by the way, are critical for nutritional support of a mother, period, any stage of a mother's life. We know that those methylated B vitamins, when we talk about epigenetics, one of the biggest things we're seeing today is MTHFR and all its variations. And we're finding more and more that this concept of methylation, where you have the chemical group attached to certain compounds in your body, is being disrupted because of environmental toxicity and some of the things we've talked about today. So adding in, not necessarily from Chinese medicine, but just from the research and things we've seen in practice, I would add to that list of foods, taking a good methylated B vitamin and adding iron in are essential for a mother. Moving on to the gut, we do want to talk about the gut because remember, the gut was ground zero. It was ground central for your health and for your child's health too. And you'll see a mom with a weak gut will often have a child with a weak gut, and the patterns are often very similar. And to me, that's, again, fascinating. But here's what you can do. Diet is key, so finding the right diet for you. We mentioned some diet strategies just a second ago. But in addition, include some of these things. Include glutamine. Glutamine is an amino acid. It helps to rebuild the gut lining, and I like adding in about 2 to 3 grams a day. Again, those broths that we were just talking about that have a lot of the peptides and collagen and sort of the immune builders for you, those are really important as well. Adding in probiotics that help to balance the gut microbiome, and digestive enzymes. What I'm seeing a lot of nowadays in practice is where many people have damaged their gut health so much so much so that the gallbladder is not able to function. We're not digesting fats well. We're not metabolizing fats well. So adding in a digestive enzyme with your meals, one that has lipase in it ideally, will help to metabolize fats better. So digestive enzymes, broths, probiotics, glutamine, that's your gut strategy. Now, there's so many great Chinese herbals for building gut health that we can talk about as well that are warming, everything from like dandelion root is a great one. Milk thistle is another one. All of these things help support both the gut and the liver. And then remember, a lot of massage. They would do a lot of sort of perinatal massage in general of the gut area to keep things moving and flowing. So that's the strategy for building your gut health. Let's see if we can get a few more kind of takeaways here before I have to leave you. Talking about yin-yang balance, again, superwoman syndrome, nurturing yourself, being a mother, trying to make it all work. I think, again, it's a personal sort of checklist for everybody out there. Some people, do well doing it all. Some people need to pull away for a little bit for a period of their life. There's not a right or wrong answer. But here's what Chinese medicine says about this. They talk about the yin-yang balance, or sitting the month, where literally for the first 30 to 40 days, Ayurveda talks about this too, for the first 30 to 40 days after delivery, a woman was kind of isolated. She was sort of put in a separate area, and she was waited on hand and foot, taken away from anything that was distracting or noisy or that could influence or interrupt the bond that she might be creating with her child, or that might not allow her to heal. So music, home noises, other children screaming and yelling. A mother was sort of sheltered from all of that for the first 30 to 40 days post-delivery. And then to this day, if you look at a lot of, families that are Indian or Asian, you'll see the mom come over when a new grandchild comes in and sort of take over so that the mother can rest. And that rest was not just the diet that we've talked about and some of the supplements, but it was also a period of mental rest and emotional rest. I mean, rest in every sense of the word. Some of the other yin-nourishing foods that they would traditionally introduce were like things like tofu. Asparagus was considered more yin-nourishing. Berries, dark berries, all of these things were considered really important in building yin or promoting a mom to be in that more nurturing state. Postnatal massage was critical. Sleeping whenever she wanted, getting acupuncture, herbal medicines to help any different aches and pains and complaints she might have, and then massaging her consistently with different warming oils like sesame oil, for example, were key pieces of maintaining that yin state and not going into a yang state. Now, what do most of us do, myself included? We're in a yang state all the time. I was in a yang state in pregnancy. I was in a yang state postpartum. And I have to be quite honest, I think my children might have been affected by that. My little one, when I was starting the practice and seeing a lot of patients, starting the practice and doing all that planning and strategy and the stress of all of that, he ended up having reflux as soon as he came out. And sometimes I blame myself and sort of that driven energy that may have depleted me and indirectly depleted him in the process of trying to accomplish and achieve. So I think it's so important to always try to strive for balance. Sometimes we just don't know these things, and that's the reason we end up there. Okay. As we're running out of time here, it's just understand that the MOMChild Connection is significant. Chinese medicine places a lot of value and importance on it. It's not just a pregnancy and postpartum story. We are always in a season of motherhood, and it's important to understand that our emotions, our thoughts, our diet, our gut health, you know, the toxicity that we get exposed to influence not only our own health, but directly impact the health of our children. So hopefully that all made sense. Thank you so much for listening. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to take a couple. No questions? No questions? Let's see.
It's Brandy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we do have a couple questions. The first question that we have is, what is DDT and DDE?
DDT is a chemical. It's sprayed as a derivative of pesticides. Is that what she's referring to? I'm not familiar with DDE.
I am not sure. I think whichever one you were referencing in your presentation, did you say DDT?
I don't think I talked about DDT. DDT is a toxin.
Okay, I'll see if I will see if she, oh, looks like maybe she's commenting.
DDT. I don't think I mentioned DDT.
No. I do have one more question here. I have, are glutamine and digestive enzymes safe to use in pregnancy, and how much? I've heard concerns about digestive enzymes digesting the mucus plug.
Digestive enzymes are absolutely safe in pregnancy. I have no concerns about that. And glutamine, there aren't enough. The studies are conflicting. Like there are no studies done necessarily that say glutamine is bad, but glutamine, I've been fine with. I don't go to the high dose. I'll have pregnant and nursing women use about 500 milligrams of glutamine a day without any complications or problems.
Okay, a couple other things. I guess you did not mention it, but it was noted on one of your slides, either DDT or DDE.
Yeah, DDT and DDE are pesticide derivatives, so they're usually sprayed in the environment, so they're another common source of toxicity.
Okay. While I do have everyone on the line, I sent a message in the group chat. If you'd like a copy of Dr. Kaz's book, go ahead and email me at bkanya@foodsciencecorp.com with your full mailing address, and I would love to send you out a copy of her book. And it looks like that's all I have for questions.
Okay.
Oh, nope, I see. What do you recommend for women with PCOS?
Oh, wow. Okay. We could probably do a whole webinar on PCOS and pregnancy, but here's the problem with PCOS. PCOS is a triangle. So there's a gut component, there's an epigenetic component, and there's a hormone component. The best thing a pregnant, or I'm not sure where you are in your journey, if you're already pregnant, the best thing you can do is to really work on your digestive health. And that is usually the greatest win. So that most women with PCOS have issues with candida or gluten. So removing sugar from your diet, removing gluten from your diet typically helps calm down the overproduction of the androgens, which then spike the insulin, which then lead to all the complications in pregnancy. So I would say work on your gut health, remove sugar, remove gluten, add digestive enzymes, add a good probiotic in, and see if you're able to manage things that way. If you're trying to get pregnant, you're not pregnant yet and you're trying to get pregnant, it's a lot about managing androgens and insulin and really working with a practitioner who understands the relationship between the two. Because when androgens get high and insulin gets high, it blocks ovulation, and that could be the reason you're not getting pregnant. So that needs a really good workup where all three corners of that triangle, that epigenetics and hormones, all three of those are addressed to really help you get pregnant easily.
That's wonderful. Well, wonderful answer. Let's see. I don't see any. Does anyone else have any questions in the chat?
I hope it makes sense. Was everybody able to pull together Chinese medicine and conventional medicine and how we merge it all together? Hopefully you guys were able to do that.
For everyone that is asking about the presentation, a copy of this recording will be